You mentioned you worked at Prisma, and we said that many times now, and you're working on essentially a product team or the data platform team. For the viewers, what is Prisma at its core, and then what team you're on, and your kind of like what your team goals are and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So Prisma is fundamentally trying to make the data layer better, right? So they have a storied history. We used to be called GraphQL, and then we transitioned to Prisma, and Prisma, there was sort of Prisma 1 and Prisma 2. And so Prisma 1 was itself kind of a worthy sort of milestone in that journey because it was a significantly kind of different product than Prisma 2 that we have today. And so sort of that journey looked basically like there was a hosted GraphQL kind of API you put in front of your database, and you could build apps, and you just have this sort of GraphQL API as your interface to data. That was great, and people loved it, but wasn't flexible enough to scale for sort of the use cases in business that Prisma saw wanting to move towards. So then Prisma 1 was an architecture where it's a bit more modular, and you could put sort of this GraphQL API in front of your database as a separate service, so like in a Docker container or something. And this became sort of an architectural sort of part of your toolkit, but that proved to be fairly like complicated and heavy for a lot of users. And so sort of where it eventually landed was with Prisma 2, it's just an ORM, right? So you're in the same space as say like Connects or Type ORM in the Node space. And so but there's some significant differences from it just being in like an ORM like any other library. There's a Prisma Schema, which has been there for a while now, and it's used to actually be GraphQL syntax. And at one point, the syntax that Prisma has moved to sort of a proprietary one. And this syntax just allows you to declare, hey, here's how the schema of my database looks. And from that, you get a generated client that's specialized for your database, and it's completely type safe, and it's really a joy to use. So that's sort of one of the core parts of the toolkit is the Prisma client. Another part of the Prisma toolkit is a migration tool. And so that migration tool's stemming again off this Prisma schema. And as you change that Prisma schema, you can use the migrate, which is like a CLI, and you can use that to deal with, hey, migrate my database from this version of the schema to another. And it does a lot of things along the way to help you there, and like tells you if there's going to be data loss and guides you in sort of making sort of a successful journey across what tends to be sort of non-trivial for a lot of developers. And so this sort of schema has become like a core of the toolkit, and we're kind of Prisma's building, more and more spokes around that. The data platform is sort of the newest big addition here. And unlike the other pieces that kind of you run as a developer on your machine, the data platform becomes more of like a hosted offering to support your workflows and to support team collaboration, to support security related kind of aspects around, hey, we have a project with the database and we do want collaborators, but maybe we want some read-only people to get access to the database. And so there's a very large set of potential like flows, use cases, and user journeys around this when it comes to the data layer, but in a team setting, that the data platform is there to sort of help bring Prisma to the next level. The ORM is amazing as a developer to build your applications and work with the database. And Migrate is great for sort of the operations of dealing with the data evolution. But the data platform basically sits there as sort of like, now you need to collaborate, right? You're no longer just an individual hobbyist. And so this is sort of what Prisma is about. There's things on the roadmap for the Prisma data platform. Right now, you can create a project that links to a GitHub repository, and then we kind of use that schema that's in your GitHub repository, the Prisma schema. We're able to then bring that into your Prisma project. There's a data browser, there's a query console, so you interact with your database. You can invite collaborators. There's sort of different authorization rules. And there'll probably be, in early 2022, some features around preview databases. Anyway, I won't commit to timelines, but in 2022, sort of how Versal has preview deployments for a branch in a GitHub pull request. Imagine you basically open up that pull request and you just you have a preview database ready to go. Probably the biggest use case right now is sort of the serverless story with data layer, which is pretty painful in practice when you go to production and you actually are ready to like, hey, the world come use my app. It turns out there's some gotchas. And so the connection pooling issue is one of the big ones, where it turns out that the database with all these connections coming from different lambdas that have sort of undetermined life cycles, right? There might be a hot lambda that's reused, but might be spun down and you get another lambda. But each lambda is making a connection to the database. And these are not necessarily designed originally to be sort of, many of them. So if you get into cases where the database has too many connections because there's too many lambdas scaling horizontally. So data proxy from Prisma, which you use through the data proxy, is sort of a solution for people that want to deploy to serverless. So it's a good fit if you're got like a Versal app, say, or say Netlify, all sorts of these sort of serverless space deployments, data proxy sort of gives a really viable option there that fits nicely. If you're already using Prisma, like especially, it fits in really nicely, kind of seamlessly.